Welcome to the Entrepreneur Show. This is your host, Michael Mara. I'm the CEO and founder of Entre, a social network for entrepreneurs, investors, and freelancers. On this show, we interview the top CEOs, venture capitalists, angel investors, and founders. Connect with me and thousands of other like-minded people by signing up for free at joinentre.com or download our mobile app on iOS and Android. Welcome back, everyone. On this episode, I'm interviewing Diane Prince. She's started more than 7 companies. She's had 5 exits. She's hired more than 2,000 people, and she sold one of the businesses for $28 million. Now she's a founder coach, and we dive into a ton of interesting stuff about starting businesses, hiring people, firing people, raising capital, how to bootstrap your business, and the tools that entrepreneurs need to start and grow a successful business. I hope you enjoyed the episode. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Entrepreneur Show. I'm super excited for our guest today. Diane, welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to get some one-on-one time with you too.
Yes.
You online all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, you have an incredible background and story. And I'd just like to start with, you've started over 7 companies. You've had all the success with exits and whatnot. I want to start with giving people a little bit of like, how did you get into all of this entrepreneur stuff? Like, give us the backstory as to how it came to be. Were your parents entrepreneurs? Did you always want to be an entrepreneur? Did you stumble upon it? Tell us that backstory.
Okay. Pretty much none of the above. So when I became an entrepreneur, it was before that was really, even a thing. Like if I went to my high school reunion and said I'm an entrepreneur, people would think, what the hell? Who are you? Like, do you think you're Donald Trump?
Right.
Yeah, just, and I was in Venice, California. So I feel like I was very ahead of my time. I had no idea what I wanted to do. After I got my bachelor's degree, I thought about getting an MBA and I thought about getting a job, and I was so scared. I went into academia, and I got a master's degree in French literature. And it was the most stressful 2 years. And I have failed at startups, and like that 2 years was terrible. But when it was time we had this crazy exam where I had to read like 180 books in French and talk about them, and I didn't even understand, analyzing text. But anyway, so afterwards, they tell you if you got invited to the PhD program or not, and there was like nobody didn't get invited. It's like there was like the legend person who like 7 years ago didn't get invited. So I was that person. So they called the chair.
Hilarious.
Oh my God, the chair of the department called me. I will never forget this. And she's like, we think you're better suited towards business. And wow. I was like, okay. And then I got married really young. I was in my early 20s. And so I do believe in the why. So I don't believe that when you do a startup, to me, it hasn't necessarily been about being super passionate about what the product was. To me, I do, and we can talk about more about this, about when you build your co-founding team. But my husband then, we wanted to be together. We were newlyweds. And so we just thought, well, what if let's start a business? And that's how it got. And then we started brainstorming.
That's great. I am curious because I feel like French literature is like so random, but I'm curious why French literature, number one, and number two, has that ever come back to benefit you in some way doing business with people from France or French people, French speakers?
Well, okay, so French literature, because I had studied French in college. I spent my junior year in Paris. I worked at a French department store in Paris after college. And I had this romantic vision of, I thought being a professor was like sitting in a beautiful building and reading books and smoking cigarettes. I mean, I have not smoked in 30 years, but that was sort of like what I thought it would be. And I was in Wisconsin then. That's where I went to undergrad. My boyfriend at the time, I knew I was going to live in either New York City or LA. I'm like, I want to be where the action is. And I got into NYU, which was a French civilization program, and UCLA, that was French literature. He wanted to stay in Milwaukee. I said, I am leaving. If you want to come with me, you can choose where we go. So that's how we chose. I got literature, really.
Nice. That's super fascinating. And has it helped you at all in the business world, knowing friends?
No, but I did actually, what's helped me though, I think, is the teaching part. And I actually became a professor 2 years ago. I live in Malibu, and I got a text from a friend from grad school who said, do you want to teach French 2 at Pepperdine? That afternoon, they were very desperate. That afternoon, I met with the Dean of International Studies at Starbucks. I said, I have not taught since 1993. And I was a TA for 1 year. I taught French 101. And I said, if you want me to do this, I can. I said, I went into business instead. And it was so fun. So no, not business wise, but I do believe that the teaching part has really helped me to be a mentor and a coach.
Interesting. And that we'll get into that later, because that's a big part of your life now, which I think is super fascinating. But I'm curious. So you and your husband decided to start a business, right? And you didn't necessarily have the like, we have this like great idea and we want to do this thing, and it was very clear. So going through that process, because there's probably a lot of people that are in maybe a similar situation where they want to start a business, but they're not sure what to do necessarily. How did you go about that brainstorming session or uncover what business to actually start?
Yeah, it was really a discovery process. So we had our goal, right? So our goal was actually to build something big and see if we could build something and sell it and retire. That was our goal. So when we were thinking about ideas, that was what we kept in mind. I mean, this is before like SaaS and, all that stuff. So we were, that was what we had in mind, but we were very intentional about, so once we had that purpose, we were very intentional about then getting to work and figuring out what kind of business would make sense, would take off. It was really, before that was even a thing, figuring out what timing and product market fit we could find.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk now about when you went from, the inception to then, actually growing, several successful businesses. And one of the things that I do want to dive into is that how do you make your first kind of hires? Because we both know that you can't do anything big alone, right? You need a core team, you need co-founders and people involved at the early stages to really help you turn anything into something big if you want to do that. So how did you approach that? Do you have any piece of advice that you can share on how people should approach hiring their first, few employees, or how they should approach looking for a co-founder?
Yeah. So for hiring, I think that people need to remember that they're starting a business, and businesses take money. You're a business, like, to me, that's, I know there are businesses out there, obviously, that have huge, market share is the thing, but most people are not starting Uber or Amazon or Twitter or whatever, So I think, and that's a whole other thing, and that's great for them and, whatever. But I think for the vast majority of founders have the opportunity to start an actual business with revenue. So to me, I think that is very important to me to get revenue quickly. So to build a product and have revenue instead of going out and trying to hire people with no money. which is now illegal in a lot of states. I mean, I know in California, you can't do that anymore.
And I totally agree with that. I think a lot of people, it's kind of the Silicon Valley culture that has developed where people praise and spend more time trying to raise money than actually trying to make money. But once say you get revenue going, or say you raise maybe some money from angel investors to build the product, and you have capital now to bring on employees, are there things that you did when you were hiring that you learned the do's and don'ts? Like if you can share any stories, either good or bad, that worked out or maybe didn't work out, that might be helpful for people.
Yeah, what I've learned, I actually did a YouTube video on this that I'm about to post, but so many people ask about hiring because it's hard. And that's the thing, is every time you get to a different stage in your business, it's like, oh shoot, like, now I have a business, like now I have people, now I have to deal with these people. But it really is all about your team and your people. And I have learned that there's a book I love is called Who, and it has a system, and this is like, I kind of you started using this even more recently, and so it's basically, I think that as systematic as you can get in the actual interview process when you're talking to somebody. So I think it's really important to know what your purpose is, as I mentioned, and also know what your core values are and get really clear on that. And once you have your core values and you understand what's important to you in building your business, you can build a roadmap to make it systematic, because otherwise you can really get lost in the hiring process. It can be so overwhelming. And it's, so I believe is making it as systematic as possible. And then also, as far as co-founders go, and then when I hire the wrong people, I fire them very quickly. That's really important to me. Like, you just know, and it might sound brutal, but when you're in a startup, everybody has to be on board. Everybody has to be, they don't have to have the same personal goals. But everybody has to be going in the same direction. And that is so extremely important, because if somebody is kind of veering off and you only have 3 or 5 or 10 people or whatever on your team, it is really, really toxic, and that the wheels can come off. So, and as far as a co-founder, I believe, because I hear a lot of advice about how to find a co-founder. So I think a lot of people feel a desperation and I have been in those shoes. I was a solo founder, a clothing business, and we were actually bringing in some decent revenue and moving along. And I went out to raise, and I was pitching and got a lot of advice that it would be better if I had a co-founder. And I found and then I ended up rushing into a relationship, and it was a total disaster. Now, the co-founder relationships that I've had that have been successful were all because whatever the business was, that all of the founders saw it as a vehicle to get to whatever their personal goals were. For example, it's like really my keystone business was that $50 million business. But we had our first co-founder. So we already had some good revenue and traction. We had hired employees because we had built revenue, and we hired them only when it was really uncomfortable and we really needed people. And then when we realized we needed to bring someone else in, we also knew we wanted to sell the company and retire. So it was a staffing company, and we found somebody who his goal, his purpose was to become the CEO of a publicly traded staffing company. So he held so tight to that goal. And there were times I know he wanted to get the hell out. There were times when, there's times when it's gnarly and it's easy to leave, Right, but he knew, and it did, that it worked, and it got him to where he wanted to go, and it got us to where we wanted to go.
Yeah, I think you said a couple of things there that's important. I think personal objectives should be aligned, and people have to, you know, it's so critical. And I didn't realize this at the beginning either, which is why I never really had any necessarily true co-founders with Entre, right? There's a lot of people involved and whatnot, but yeah, I've never had those true co-founders because the people that were there at the beginning, it didn't align like what you're saying. It was the same thing. Like I didn't understand they had other, career goals. They had other things going on in their life. They had other time commitments and things that were going on because it's very hard for people to drop everything that they're doing in their lives to focus on a company and most of the time not get paid nearly the amount that they would want or need in most cases. So I think now I spend a lot of time making sure that, people are aligned at the beginning, making sure everyone's like understanding what the real objectives are with this. And I think the other thing, too, is firing quickly, right? That's why I like working with people so fast because I know, and I'm sure you were hinting at this, right? Like within a couple of weeks of working with someone, whether you like working with them or not, like for the most part, like if you get a new group project with someone like in school, whatever, like very quickly whether you're going to enjoy the group project with the people that are in your group. Same thing with the startup. So it's super interesting. And to your other point about going in the same direction, there's this analogy with rowers, right? Where good rowing teams, you have to be rowing consistently in the exact same direction with the exact same force and all that. If one person's a little bit out of sync or going slightly, you're going to change the whole trajectory of that. And I think that's a lot how I think about it now too. I think that was, exactly how I've learned now through trial and error, what you just said. So I hope everyone was really paying attention to that advice. If you want to add anything to that, feel free. But I want to move on quickly to, you mentioned raising capital, which is kind of the next step. So once you hire a team, have your co-founders in place for the most part, or do it as a solo founder, start generating some revenue, all of that. The next step for a lot of people then is figuring out how to raise capital if they can, or if they need to. I know you've raised some money, but you've also had revenue generating businesses from the beginning. So I don't know if you want to speak about that a little bit and any things you've learned raising capital as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I mostly bootstrap my companies. My first company, we had money set aside to buy a house for a down payment, and we invested that in the business instead. So, and then we quickly made revenue. And then as we were scaling, and we were very attractive to partners or co-founders because of our attraction and our growth. So we actually had people, all of the executive team actually bought in to the company. So they had nice salaries. We did pay people really well, actually. And then they had nice salaries, but they also they invested.
Gotcha.
In the company. And then I've also, I've looked at throughout the businesses, I've looked at different ideas of like, different ways to raise capital. Credit line. I mean, we did have a credit, I've had, that I think is the best way to fund, and I've funded through not so friendly sources as well. When I had my clothing business, that was a really big lesson to me because that was the first time that I actually went out and started like pitching for an equity partner like that. And that was just really tough. And I learned how much energy it takes, how much time it takes, how you can get to a pitch competition and do really well. And sometimes there isn't even money there, sometimes, like you said, to your point, like it gets to be about the whole pitching culture. Mm-hmm. And I found that to me to be very, I went out of business eventually. It was just, and that's when I had brought in a co-founder. I got that advice. So I really feel like I had that experience of kind of going out there and trying to play that game. And for me, that game did not work for me.
And honestly, I think it depends on what you want, but a lot of people, they fall into that trap as well because they're not clear on what they really want to do and what type of business they really want to have from the beginning. So I think that's great. How did you approach being bootstrapped? Like, how did you approach being a revenue first business? Because I think that's undervalued, but honestly, the best way to go for the majority of people so they don't get into these fundraising cycles and have to keep raising more money and more money and going through that and giving up more and more equity and stuff. Were you focused on like staying very lean and just doubling down on what worked? Or if you want to dive into some strategies you used for other people that are maybe trying to grow a bootstrap business too?
Yeah, because I learned also that, it's as you bring in people, that's a whole other time, that's like a whole way that you spend your time is dealing with those people.
For sure.
So like for my clothing business, for example, I recruited women to sell. So I made samples, and then I had people selling in home parties. And so that was, and I totally bootstrapped that. I recruited people on Facebook. I mean, I was just like, did tons of videos. There's a ton of YouTube videos still up. I was looking at them the other day and just, started bringing in, sold them inventory, and they started selling. And then in other businesses, we just, with the staffing business, that's really cash intensive. Because we'd pay everybody, and then we had to pay everybody every week that they worked. So our payroll was insane. Like within a few months, we were doing $1 million. We were like at $1 million run rate. Then all of a sudden, by year 5, we were at $1 million payroll a week. And that's a lot of cash to put out. So we mostly got revenue. Then we got a credit line. And then with another staffing company, we did get into some trouble by factoring our payroll, which was it's a really expensive, basically, way to sell your receivables. And that was really detrimental and hugely cut into our profit.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that's really fascinating. How did you, I think scaling your staff, like, did you put people in place to help hire at a rate, or did you want to be heavily involved in that? So, because at the beginning, you as the founder, you're probably hiring most people, but once you hit a certain number of employees, that becomes very difficult. How did that work?
Yeah, we hired really good people. And we were all, and one thing I heard a speaker recently talk about how if you want to avoid drama within your company, you create your own company drama, which is not in a negative way. It's just the story of what you're building. And so people were pretty excited about what we were doing and what we were building. And so, no, we had really good people. I mean, at first we hired and we managed them, but then we had really good people who managed the team, and they grew the team.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's great. I think super important too. I want to jump to you've had 5 exits. And what is that process like, and how did those come to be? You can share, how one of them went, or if you want to just talk through what what that was like and how difficult it was, or the thought that went into it and how both parties had to come together. I think a lot of founders are starting companies to hopefully have an exit of some sort for the most part. So I'm curious what you think people should be, if they are at that point in time where they're maybe looking to get acquired, what are the things that they should be thinking about?
Well, they need to really understand their numbers, and they have to have that. We always had audited financials once we got to a certain point. I hear a lot of founders say, I'm not a numbers person. I'm not a numbers person either. But and I learned the hard way, that you really do have to, you have to know your numbers and you have to be able to explain them. So you don't need to go get a degree in accounting, but you definitely need to have a clear understanding of what's coming in and going out. That's really important. And then, let's see. So, and I've exited in different ways, from like a yellow notepad and calling everybody I knew and telling them I'm selling this business, to hiring investment bankers. And the investment banker route was very expensive. However, we made a lot more money, I think, because of that. And then what I learned too is that, and I have a picture I've got to post of the day that we closed the sale of the first business. It was like an entire conference table of manila files of things we had to sign. But I spent about, our first exit, we were supposed to do a deal, and 9/11 happened. The deal fell through. Like, long story short, they were actually here from New York, from Ernst & Young, doing diligence in our CPA's office. And then, yeah, I know their office was in the trade towers, that Ernst & Young.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. So the deal fell through, and then we decided to hunker down. And then we actually decided we were going to buy companies until the economy picked back up. And it turned out that we hired somebody to find companies to acquire. And the first call he made was a business broker. And they said, well, we actually know a company that might want to buy you. And that's
hilarious.
It all totally goes to like, and then I learned, like, if people want the deal to happen, because it's all about people, right. We kind of forget, like, it's about emotions and people. And the deal, I spent the next 10 months, that's pretty much all I did, was manage that deal.
Mm-hmm.
And the lawyers and, everything, and the negotiation. And it fell apart about 7 times. And then, until it finally happened. But then there's other ways that I've gotten really creative. And I had another staffing business that I was on the board, and then I ended up, I had been retired, and then there were other, like, a lot of other different businesses that weren't as significant. But with this one, I ended up having to step in as CEO, and I did not want to. And I had 3 little kids. I had just gotten divorced, and I hired like a fractional CEO, and it just did not work. And so I was like, okay, so I did step in, and then I brought in a new management team. Anyway, long story short, I sold off a division of the company, and then we did another deal. But that was basically like, we had no cash. Our revenue was $35 million. And we were in crazy debt, and we had no cash. It was so scary.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. But that was when I got out the yellow notepad. I literally called everyone in the industry.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I want you to dive deeper into, you said something that I think is really important about everything's about people and emotions and stuff. And I'm sure you spend a lot of time now with, as a coach and some of the founders you work with, talking about that a little bit. And I'd like you to dive a little bit deeper into that, if you'd like, and how important that part of it is, and understanding people, working with people, managing people, or even just building relationships, and how critical that is to success as an entrepreneur and kind of just building and expanding your network. So if there's anything that you want to share on that topic, I think it'd be interesting to dive into that too.
Yeah, I mean, I can share in that example that I just mentioned when we were completely in debt. It was really not a good situation. And so we had decided, so I had brought in a COO to help me run it. And his family was like his father was the CEO of the biggest staffing company in the world. He was interested in buying the company. Anyway, we just decided but we had to sell off we basically worked out a deal where if I sold one of the divisions, I could keep that money and they could keep the company. Okay. So, and that was really important to both of us because we all had what we want, we knew what we wanted to get out of it. And they wanted a US based business. The guy is still running it, still amazing business. Anyway, but without getting into all the details of the deal, because it was private, but at one point we're going to a conference in Florida, and I was a speaker at the conference, and he was my partner then, because they had invested in the company, and he's like, we can't, we're going through every single line item. I mean, literally like every single line item, and he's like, we can't afford to go to the conference, and I said, James, we're selling the company at this conference, and and it's that. I mean, when you're an entrepreneur, there are those moments when you just want to quit. It feels so bad. You feel like a total failure. In my case, we had like $250,000 in debt. And by the way, like personally guaranteed, because we had bank loans and all that stuff. And so your question of connecting, I'm getting to that. So I realized, because I was retired for a while, and I realized when I took over this company, I had to get back involved with that, my industry with staffing. It's like, I have to get back involved. So I became the social media expert. And back then it was like LinkedIn had just started. Mm-hmm. People were scared to have their employees on LinkedIn. So I started speaking, and I started getting to speak at giant companies. Like I was at Manpower doing a Twitter party, and there's one of the biggest companies. So anyway, so I stepped up to talk at the conference, and I ended up running into someone at a cocktail party, and literally there were 2 years that it was a blur, like dealing, being in this company. And I made a lot of mistakes and a lot of things I would have done differently. But I go to this cocktail party. It was at the Hotel Fountain Blue in Miami. And that's another thing too. Like we're spending like shit ton of money in this fancy hotel. We were like, it was crazy, but it was like, that's where the conference was. And so I ran into somebody, and he goes, he's like, oh yeah, we met at the Career Builder event in Chicago, which was like this total boondoggle. And I was like totally sick that weekend. Anyway, they ended up buying the company. So it was just total connections. And also I think because I stepped up and started speaking and becoming, and I tell this to some of my clients who are looking to be acquired in a strategic acquisition, building relationships with other people in that industry, that was huge, because people saw me on stage. They saw me, and I wasn't scared to call them and tell them that my company was for sale.
Oh yeah. I think that's, once you establish credibility in a space, doors start opening up for sure. I think, that's great. And it seems like it's so funny too. And the funniest stuff happens when you're least expecting it. Like, and if you just keep being consistent and persistent, like it's so weird how things off your radar come into fold just for putting in the work, day after day, and keeping focused on what you're trying to achieve. So yeah, and I want to talk now, before we wrap up here, about what you're focused on now. As a founder and entrepreneur coach, I want you to talk about this specific like phrasing here. because you mentioned it before we hit record, and it's on your website and stuff, that you're on a mission to take the bullshit out of entrepreneurship. So I want you to talk about that and share about what you're doing with founders and the things that you're uncovering or the things that you're really helping, and how you're really doing this as a coach.
Yeah, thanks. So I realized that, and maybe it was those few weeks of substitute teaching and professoring at Pepperdine, how much, but I love to teach. And in my clothing business, it was a lot of, like, I did a lot of mentoring and coaching on that. That was one of the elements of it. And I've volunteered as a pitch coach and a mentor in different organizations. So that's always been something that I've really enjoyed. And I'm also absolutely obsessed with scaling businesses. And I have been obsessed with scaling a business that gives tools to make entrepreneurs' journeys or businesses or whatever to make their life easier and more successful. And I believe I'm the person to do it because of my experience and I've also been through a lot of personal stuff in that journey. I've been I started in the 90s, obviously aging myself, but who cares? Whatever. But I think, I have learned that it is because after I had a big failure, it took me a long time to pick myself back up. And I felt like I was not part of the club. And everything to me at that point had been so extreme. Like, I had so much money, not to, a lot of people, but to most people it was a lot of money, and then I had this like massive failure, and it was like, and I felt like I started feeling like an imposter. And then I forgot about all those exits. I forgot about all the hundreds of millions of dollars that I had generated, and so I wanted to, and I saw also what kind of I had experienced, the pitching and all of that. So I just wanted to make it easier. And my passion is building businesses, and I realized I can help other people do that. So what I'm doing, because I kind of always am doing alongside what I'm working on. So I'm building a scalable business. I'm building out group programs, group coaching programs, and I'm looking at different ways that I can do that. Ultimately, I'm looking at building out an actual tool to run your business. That's a software. And so I'm one-on-one coaching now. Well, that's my MVP. And then I'm also, my group coaching program will have been launched by the time this airs. So
incredible.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah. And, I think this is why, what brought us together in this whole kind of, alignment towards helping and supporting entrepreneurs, because obviously that's, our focus. And I'm super excited to have a follow-up with you on this, because there's definitely a lot of stuff that we can do. And, I think right now more than ever, people are trying to figure out how to be an entrepreneur, make money online, or do something that they actually care about, rather than, the traditional corporate 9-to-5 BS lifestyle that is very draining and taxing on a lot of people. And they don't get to, unleash their creative power within them. So I love that. And I know there's a lot of people here who will probably be reaching out and following up to get in touch about your coaching. And I think it's super smart what you're doing for sure. I want to talk about this this post that you commented on that kind of started this, even though we've kind of been we've seen each other at some virtual events and stuff previously, but I made a post about how kids are spending 4 years and $100,000 to study entrepreneurship at universities, to learn from professors who, for the most part, have never even started a business. And you commented on that, and I'd love to get have you share your thoughts on what you think. I mean, you went through higher education and all of this stuff too, And obviously things have changed, but I'm curious your perspective as an entrepreneur and kids interested in entrepreneurship, how you think they should maybe be approaching college, and if they want to go down that path, how they should be looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, and look, like I would never give someone advice on go to college or not, or even, people ask, when should I quit my job? Because I don't know the answer. The answer is different for everyone. For 100%. Me, I always quit my job and I need to just focus full on my business. 100%. I do think there's a lot of value in understanding the nuts and bolts. But I don't know. I'm just going to say I have 3 college-aged children. And I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a scam. I mean, honestly, as someone from higher education and who's put one through college and almost, I don't know. I think there's a lot of different kind of ideas now about college and just realizing. I mean, I think everything. I mean, I'm going to go off on a soapbox, but everything is about money and making money off of people. And when I started coaching, when I kind of decided that I was the one to do this, not the one. I mean, there's a lot of really good coaches out there, but I did start listening to other coaches and consultants and looking at their bios and realizing that they had never done this.
Yeah. And that's the scary thing too. And that's what's happening, not just out in the world, but there's people who are spending a lot of money. My mom's a college professor, and I went to college and everything too. And it's one of those things where for me, it depends on what you want to do, right? But entrepreneurship specifically is one of those things that needs to, and in business too, business school, business entrepreneurship, it's all kind of grouped together in a little bit now, but all of that stuff needs to be taught differently in a sense, because it just doesn't make sense for the most part, how things are happening right now. And I'm mostly concerned about the affordability of it. I think if college was $10,000 a year, no one would even be having this conversation. It's the significance of the price and the debt, because the debt is what actually holds people back of starting the business in the first place. So all the kids who are graduating from entrepreneurship degrees can't even start a business because they're so much in debt. That's the real caveat to the problem. I obviously, we could probably talk about that a lot, and I don't want to get too off track with it, but I'd love to, as we close out here, I'd love to have you share where people can follow up with you, where people can find out more about your coaching and everything else that you're doing right now. Where's the best place for people to look you up, check out your website, or hit you up on social media?
Cool. Well, of course, I'm on Entre. Big fan of you guys. and I'm all over the place. I'm very easy to find. Diane Prince, and my website's dianeprince.co. And I'm on LinkedIn, and I am my Instagram is at the Diane Prince, but it's mostly personal. So if you want to see a whole bunch of pictures of me and my kids,
awesome.
I'm now really scared to be on Clubhouse.
Yeah, Clubhouse is a whole different world, and it will be interesting. But you're quickly becoming an Entre influencer. I've been seeing a lot of your posts, and they're getting a lot of traction. You're hitting the For You page a lot, so I'm excited to have you continue to grow on there and connect with people. And happy to be involved. And if people want to do, I do free growth calls. So I'll have free consultations, and then also talking to people about if they'd be a fit for some of my group coaching. Fantastic. Yeah. And we'll put the links to that in the show notes and stuff too, for anyone who wants to follow up. But Diane, this was amazing. Any final piece of advice, tips for just entrepreneurs that are listening in on everything going on in the world, or maybe if they're struggling or trying to get through something, they're starting out, what if there's anything that you want to leave them off with?
Yeah, I'm going to use you as an example because I've been watching you guys in the Entre team and what you're building. And I really admire the way, because I know it's hard, I know personally what you're going through, but I know the journey. I know that the entrepreneurial journey is hard, and you guys keep trucking and you keep adding new features. And I think that part, when I'm working with clients, it's the drop off point for entrepreneurs is, it's so huge. Somebody asked me, what do most people do in this situation? I'm like, most people fail. That's what most people do, so that's not the question to ask. I believe the only reason that companies fail is because the founder has stopped trying to solve the problems. Cash flow, wrong team, bad product, all those things can be solved. But once you decide to stop solving the problems, that's when your company fails.
I like that a lot.
Sometimes it's the right thing, but anyway, that's what I believe. And 100%. So it's that part. I guess I'll end with this. There's a part of being totally overwhelmed. It's like, and not being confident in what you're doing, questioning yourself, feeling like you're an imposter, which, by the way, all entrepreneurs are, because you're building something that's never been done before. So, and so having that's all there, right? That's all true. And you might be lacking motivation. And then at the same time, you're like holding these two truths, right? Because I do believe that the mindset stuff is really important too. So while all of this stuff is happening and you feel like there's just, a house of bricks on top of your head and you'll never get out of it, at the same time, you are taking the next steps, because a startup is going from this, where you are, to the next stage and the next stage. So all that stuff can be true. And then you are also doing this at the same time.
I absolutely love that. And yeah, I think you have to have just that burning desire to solve that problem. And for me, I'm absolutely obsessed with this. And there's nothing else that I want to do for really the rest of my life besides help entrepreneurs connect entrepreneurs and build this platform, because I've already seen how much it's helped. I'm sure you've already seen, just when you help an entrepreneur, help people get clarity or help them do something on their own, it's there's nothing else that it's just incredible. And I see how important this is for, a lot of people. And it's something that I think you just said it so beautifully, right? You have to, if you ever stop solving the problem, that's when things are going to start going south. And I've seen other founders too, that they just think something's a good idea, but they're not deeply passionate about solving it. And I think that's where the unlock is. And I'm really glad you brought that up. I think it's a great way to end it, for sure. So, and thank you so much for doing this. I'm excited to talk to you more and figure out ways that we can collaborate as well. And everyone, go check out and reach out to Diane, DianePrince.co. And thank you so much for being here and sharing this.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Entrepreneur Show. If you'd like to connect and network with other like-minded people, entrepreneurs, investors, freelancers, and startups, check out our app or go to our website, joinentre.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. If there's anything that we can do to help you, please reach out to us and let us know.